Good morning, everyone. It's Pastor Monica McDougall here of Attica First United Methodist Church in Attica, Indiana, and it is a joy to be with you all this morning, Sunday, July 6th. Today's sermon was inspired by a passage from the book of Exodus, chapter 13, verses 17 through 22, which this morning I will be reading from the New International Version, or the NIV. Please join me as we prepare our hearts and minds for worship this morning as we hear these words from the book of Exodus. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road towards the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or by night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. The word of God for the people of God. Praise be to God. So this morning at our in-person worship service at Attica First, we will open our worship service by singing a very well-known, famous, beloved old hymn, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah. Now, I always kind of pick hymns that have something to do with the topic of the sermon. Doesn't always work out, but that's usually my hope and my goal. And this week is certainly true of that. In the second verse of Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, we sing the words, quote, let the fire and cloudy pillar lead me all my journey through. And as you might guess, this is a direct reference to this passage from the book of Exodus, where God is said to appear in the form of a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day, as God helps guide the Israelites out of Egypt. The author of this widely popular hymn was a Welshman named William Williams. Though Williams became a traveling Methodist minister, that was never his intention. As a young man, Williams dreamed of becoming a physician. But like most people who go on to become pastors that I know, he heard God's call, and though he tried to outrun it, he couldn't. And eventually he joined the Methodist movement in 1744. But Williams's journey of faith was not an easy one or a smooth one. At the time, Methodism was not its own denomination as it is now. It's actually connected to many different denominations. But at the time, Methodists were reformers within the Church of England. They had no desire to set out on their own. They just wanted to change things up in the denomination they belonged to, the Church of England. But over time, Methodists began facing mounting criticisms from the church, and this led to many of their leaders being charged and excommunicated. But this did not deter Williams, who began his work as a traveling pastor. But being a traveling pastor in the 1740s and 50s in England was physically and financially demanding work. And we get the sense from the poems that Williams wrote during this time that he was struggling greatly. He was struggling with his faith. He was struggling to trust that everything was going to be okay, that he had made the right choice by answering God's call. And in the poem that would go on to become the famous hymn, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, Williams beautifully interweaves imagery from the book of Exodus to evoke a sense of God's guidance through times of strife. And I think this is why this hymn has lasted the test of time and is beloved by so many people. For instance, it was famously one of Princess Diana's favorite hymns. It was featured during her funeral service in 1997, and it was sang at her son William's wedding in 2011. Williams, who wrote this poem, spoke to the universal experience of struggle in his work. And every Christian, really every person everywhere, encounters difficulties and hardships in life, hardships that test their resolve, faith, and patience. The story of struggle is a tale as old as time, and it is a story that our religious ancestors knew intimately. Our passage from Exodus 13 picks up right after the last plague. After generations of slavery in Egypt, that final plague finally wears Pharaoh down, and he agrees to let the people go. But if the Israelites thought that their suffering was finally over, they were quickly disappointed to learn that the road ahead would be long and arduous. In many ways, their suffering had only just begun. In fact, their journey was going to be extra long and arduous because, as the text tells us, God decides to take the long way around. In the wilderness, there were no highways, no road signs, no rest stops, no truck stops, no maps or GPS systems to help guide their way. No, it was just them, the ground beneath their feet, for miles and miles, for years and years. Now, I want you to take a moment to imagine that journey. I don't know about you, but it's kind of hard for me to imagine what that was like. When my husband Mac and I set out on a journey, we always know where we're going. We know how long it's going to take. When we make the trip to my parents in Kansas, we even stop at the exact same places along the way. We get past Champaign, Illinois, and stop at the Pride of the Prairie Rest Area. Then we get lunch in Springfield. Then we cross the rest of Illinois, stopping across the Mississippi River in Hannibal, Missouri to refill the gas tank. Then it's nonstop for 3.5 hours across Missouri until we make our last stop north of Kansas City and finish through to my parents' house. I've made that drive and all of those stops so many times that I could do it in my sleep. I cannot fathom what it would have felt like to wander in the desert wilderness on foot with no end in sight. But that's what it was like for the Israelites. They've known no other life but slavery and struggle. Of course, they've been told their history. They've heard about the wonders and the miracles of their mighty God. And they have hope that God will deliver them from their plight, just like God has always done before for their people. But even still, as imperfect as a home as it was, Egypt was the only home that any of them had ever had. To willingly walk away from that home, to head out into the unknown of the desert, that required courage and faith unlike anything they had ever had to muster up before. And I wonder if they had known what the journey ahead actually looked like, if they would have gone at all. After all, this long way around that God takes them on ends up taking 40 years. Now I know what you're thinking. 40 years? That is one heck of a detour. And yeah, it really is. And it makes me wonder, why would God do that? Why add years of travel to people who are already exhausted and weary? Well, verse 17 tells us, quote, "When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt." Okay, so that detail is helpful. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it? The fastest, most direct route out of Egypt wasn't safe. God knew that they would face war, so God was protecting the people. That's why they needed to take an alternate route. But an alternate route of 40 years, that seems excessive. But in our lives too, sometimes God takes us on journeys that don't make sense to us at first. Sometimes it feels like we are spending an excessive amount of time wandering the wilderness, wondering what in the world God is up to. My husband Mac and I are in one of those wilderness periods right now as we prepare to start a family through the Indiana adoption program. While most people have been incredibly supportive of our foster to adopt journey, some have been less so. We have had more than a few people try to talk us out of it. Interestingly, none of them foster parents or adoptive parents themselves. All of the foster and adoptive parents have been our biggest cheerleaders. But we've heard every argument from people that the process is going to take too long, that the adoption could fall through its last minute, that kids in the system have a lot of issues, and my personal favorite, that there are, quote, easier ways to become parents. And that last point always gets me because I have many friends and family members who decided to pursue parenting through the traditional route, only to discover that it's not always so easy that way either. But I think where a lot of these arguments are coming from is that people are falsely assuming that Mac and I are being naive about the process. That sure, we've heard the horror stories. We've heard about everyone's struggles through fostering kids or adopting kids, but surely we'll be the exception. We'll get the one kid that doesn't have any trauma, that doesn't have any special needs. But that is not at all how Mac and I are approaching this process. Mac and I are not on the foster to adopt journey because we think it will be easy. We're on this journey because it's the journey that God placed us on. Mac and I spent so much time in prayer and conversation about this path. And what became abundantly clear to us is that God is not taking us on the faster, more direct route to starting a family. More than that, we know that our journey is only just beginning. There will be a lot of tears and worries and questions and doubts to come. But there will also be, God willing, one more child, possibly even 2 more children who get to lay their heads down at night in a safe and stable home. And in our hearts, Mac and I know that that destination is worth the detour, no matter how long or arduous that detour may be. Now, of this passage, I stumbled upon this incredible commentary from a pastor named Toni Carmer, who works at a United Methodist Church in Plymouth, Indiana. She wrote the following: "It seems God knows that the people need to focus more on their inner battles, on what it means to be a free people, rather than on battling other nations. Their journey is more important than their destination. The idea is to move away from the 'are we there yet' question, and instead being open to the learnings and revelations that will come to them as they take each step along the way." Now, I really resonate with Reverend Carmer's points here. For Mac and I, we are learning so much already on the journey and know that there's only more learning to come. And we know that God has us out in the wilderness right now. And yeah, that wilderness journey, like all wilderness journeys, is at times exhausting and weary and scary and anxiety-inducing. But we also know that it's not a journey that we wander alone. Likewise, the Israelites weren't alone on their wilderness journey either. For starters, they had each other. And that's something Mac and I remind ourselves all of the time. One, we have one another as a couple, but also we have so many other foster and adoptive families, a network of people who have been where we've been. We have an amazingly supportive extended family who are as committed to welcoming new children into the family as we are. And we have the most loving church families who are holding us in prayer and rooting for us along the way. But more than that, we have the same thing that the Israelites had: pillars of fire and cloud guiding the way. Although for us, it's not literal. God often takes the long way around, leading us through the wilderness, but God never abandons us there. God always makes God's presence known. God is always with us, guiding us every step of the way. It reminds me of a time I went on a trip to Washington, D.C. when I was a junior in high school. My school took a junior trip every year to D.C., Philadelphia, and New York City. And when we were in DC, we had this tour guide, this hilarious woman named Brenda. And when she was showing us around all of the monuments, she would hold up a bright pink unicorn head on a stick so that we could spot her in the crowd. At one point, I got lost in the crowd somewhere near the Vietnam War Memorial, and I felt those beginning feelings of panic rising in my chest as I frantically paced around trying to spot someone that I recognized. I was 16 and in DC, surrounded by hundreds of people, and I thought I was lost. I was scared, but then all of a sudden I spotted a flash of hot pink in the air, and I followed it until I found Brenda and the rest of my classmates. The pillars of fire and cloud were kind of God's version of a hot pink unicorn head, and I have no doubt that when the Israelites spotted the fire and cloud ahead of them on the journey, that they felt the same sense of peace and relief that I felt that day when I finally found Brenda. God knew that in order for the Israelites to endure the wilderness, that they would need to see God's presence. So God made God's self clear. The physical presence of God with the people in the forms of pillars of fire and cloud helped to not only guide the people physically on their journey, but it also encouraged them as they navigated uncertainty and struggle. And the good news for us is that God is still making God's self known to us today. While God may not guide us with literal pillars of fire and cloud, God is still actively leading us and encouraging us on our difficult journeys. The physical presence of God is now made known in other ways. God has taken the forms of pillars of fire and cloud in the past, and of course we know from scripture, God also shows up as a burning bush and as a still, small, quiet voice. And of course, the most famous way God's physical presence has been made known is through the person of Jesus. In the final verse of Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, Williams writes of the blessed day when his journey would come to an end. He sings, When I tread the verge of Jordan, bid my anxious fears subside. Death of death and hell's destruction, land me safe on Canaan's side. This stanza references the book of Joshua, with the Exodus journey coming to a close as the people cross the Jordan River and arrive into Canaan. The final lines of his song concludes with exuberance as the people of Israel sing songs of victory and praise their God, their Redeemer, and their provider. And it's clear that for William Williams, this moment is powerful. It shows that he too trusted that God was going to guide him through his struggles, that all he had to do was remember to look towards God, to see God ahead, to keep his eyes fixed there, and to keep going step by step, day by day, year by year through the wilderness. Likewise, just as the Israelites kept their eyes fixed upon the pillars of fire and cloud on their journey, we know that we too are called to keep our eyes fixed upon the presence of God. We can trust that in doing so, we will find our way through the wilderness, just as the Israelites did 40 years after their journey began. My friends, I know that sometimes we find ourselves, whether as individuals or collectively, out in the wilderness, unsure of where we are headed or what lies in store for us. Journeys like those can be long, exhausting, and weary, but they are never journeys that we walk alone. The presence of God is with us always. Yes, in the person of Jesus, but also in other signs, like the sun breaking through the clouds after a storm, or a child's infectious laugh that brightens up the darkest day. Most significantly, though, we know that as people of Christ, we are called to be proof of God's presence in the lives of other people as we journey together through every wilderness journey. We are called to become pillars of fire and cloud in a way. And we know that in doing so, we cannot turn our backs on one another. We cannot abandon each other in the desert. For it is in the love of God and in the love of community that we are sustained during the hardest times that life has in store for us. God has made God's presence known in so many ways, but we know that ultimately our greatest calling is to nurture the divine presence within ourselves so that others on the journey will know that they are not alone. Amen.